Oh, hey there. So I don't know if you heard the news. Oh, I'm not feeling my hair today. What is this? What's going on? The news is good. It's good news. He was already serving a 23-year sentence in New York, and so now it's kind of official that this man is dying in prison. Can we get some of these? Can we hear some noise? Can the Weinstein Hater Club please rise up? It's kind of just like divine timing, what with Scream 6 coming out in less than 2 weeks now. Just thought I'd share. Anyway, so as you saw by the title, this is a series I'm doing called Scream for Dummies. So that begs the question, are you a dummy? Are you new to all of this? Had you even heard of Scream 2? Well, basically, it's a dumbass white movie about some dumbass white girls getting their white asses cut the fuck up, okay? And that's why we love it. Welcome to part 2 of my series Scream for Dummies. One of my patrons cleverly pointed out that the series is basically doing the opposite of gatekeeping, where I welcome you in and I share all the most important cultural touchstones of this franchise. And then that subsequently helps you enter the discourse. I highly recommend starting with Scream for Dummies Part 1 because I've been taking you through the behind the scenes of the timeline of the franchise. It all began with The Scream is the best book. I've been pulling so many quotes and stories from it, and all the quotes are coming directly from the cast and crew. So I've been spilling a ton of behind the scenes secrets, and today will be no different. First, I'll walk you through the story of the behind the scenes of Scream 2, and then I'll be doing a plot breakdown of the film. This is where I talk about all the most iconic moments to kind of get you up to speed, and then I also talk about what I think is most underrated about the movie. All that being said, of course, this will be an insanely spoiler-filled video, so this is not an I watched Scream 2 so you don't have to. These movies are all worth watching. Go in as blind as you can and just enjoy the ride. Then you can come back and then we can talk. Speaking of talking, let's get on with our history lesson, shall we? You know what? I can't deal with this. Oh, it's going up. Just not having a good hair day. Okay, not feeling it. We left off in part 1 talking about the unprecedented success of Scream and the fact that caller ID tripled in 1997. The first movie stayed in theaters for 6 months and made almost $100 million, so of course there had to be a sequel.
Let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel!
So where does the Scream 2 story begin? Well, first of all, I need to make a correction from part 1. In my first video, I mentioned that Scream made $157 million domestically, but I had mixed up the box office numbers between Scream and Scary Movie. Very ironic, I know. Scream made roughly $97.2 million, just for clarification. Now, one of the most difficult things about getting a sequel off the ground is coming up with an idea to continue the story from the first movie. Dimension Films was incredibly lucky because when Kevin Williamson pitched the first script, he already had an outline for a sequel done. In fact, when I first sat down with Kevin, in his mind, there was a trilogy here. And let me just say, this is one of the only times that a sequel will work. There are a few different circumstances in which they can. One, the first movie was sort of a fluke, like how Friday the 13th only cost $500,000 to make, and then it became one of the most famous horror movies of all time. They were just trying to copy Halloween. They didn't give a fuck. So that allowed for a lot of room for improvement for the sequels. Number 2, it's just like a matter of budget. The filmmakers of the original film clearly had a lot of vision, but with more money they could do even more. Example, the Terminator franchise or Alien. Pretty much anything James Cameron, I suppose. And really the only other time that a sequel can stick the landing is if it was planned ahead of time. If the original story really had more to tell. Another example of this that I can think of is the first 2 Insidious movies, just the way that the narratives are so closely married to one another. It was all part of the plan, baby. So Scream 2 is sort of one of those diamonds in the rough. Oh, another example of the budget one, definitely Child's Play. Yep, because Child's Play 2, mwah, best of the franchise. One thing you'll be happy to hear is that our fave Wes Craven returned to direct this movie, but almost all the rest of the crew did as well. It was important for Craven and Madalena to surround themselves with people that they trusted and liked. They were loyal to their collaborators and vice versa, which is why so many of the filmmakers kept reuniting film after film. When you work on a film set, especially for a larger production, you are basically living with these people. I worked on a highly unethical set once, and so they would work us for like 16 hours at a time, and so sometimes we would have less than like a 10-hour turnaround. Like I would drive home, crash, wake up, and not even have time to shower, that kind of thing. I don't think that was legal. But the point is, you are spending so much time with the people that you're making a movie with. They had the philosophy that you should probably enjoy those people, which I definitely agree with. Everyone recalls that Wes never yelled, which is something that is very atypical of Hollywood, especially at that time. I've covered a few directors on my channel that have been known to scream and throw tantrums on set. The set that I was just talking about had a really volatile director, and that was scary. Someone who I feel like doesn't get enough credit is Julie Plec, which was Wes Craven's assistant. We talked briefly about her in my last video, and Marion Maddalena, who was one of the producers for Craven. They worked really closely on a lot of films. But Julie Plec actually assisted Kevin Williamson in the writing of this script. And he had secured a $20 million deal with Miramax. And I'm like, girl, you should have had a piece of that. Which she did eventually. They formed a partnership, and they actually are responsible for the Vampire Diaries TV show, which I never knew. Team Damon, heyo. We famously said we'd sit in his car with the heat on, smoking cigarettes and talking about the stories that he was going to tell. That we were going to tell. We, you and him, Julie. This woman seems humble. She doesn't get enough credit. But to be fair, most of the original ideas were Williamson's, including Stab, which is the movie franchise within the Scream universe. Adding the meta Stab film was always part of Williamson's plan from when he wrote the initial outline included with the original script. Stab is a movie in the Scream universe which is based off of the book that Gale Weathers wrote about the Woodsboro murders. Something else that is so iconic that they introduced in this installment of the franchise is Dewey's score. The filmmakers also decided to explore the characters further through the score. Speaking about Dewey, the composer said, "I viewed him as sort of a Western sheriff lone guy." Oh, I love it. I love it. I can't for the life of me reason why the composer felt this way. Dewey was the dorkiest goof in the first movie. He does not give me Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday kind of energy at all. But it's for that reason that I love the score so much. It's just feel-good music. One reason why they were able to explore these creative avenues a bit more is because money was really no longer an issue. In fact, the promotional budget alone for the sequel was larger than the original film's entire production budget. Luckily, this means that they were also basically given autonomy as filmmakers. If you recall, the Weinsteins were wreaking havoc on production of the first film. They weren't happy with The Mask, they wanted to fire Wes Craven, they didn't think that Drew Barrymore looked sexy enough. Like, get a job, stay out of their business. It seems like for the sequel they did. They had a lot more trust in the filmmakers. So did everyone else, because after the success of the first movie, everybody wanted to be in these films. Actors were so eager to be in the film, they would take any role. Everyone wanted to be in it, so they didn't really care what it was. They knew it would be that kind of quality. For instance, during this time, Sarah Michelle Gellar was insanely busy with her Buffy shooting schedule, but regardless, she was like, I need to be in Scream.
I actually signed on before I got to read the script. That's how confident I was that I wanted to be a part of this, and I love Kevin's writing, and I really would love to work with Wes, that I signed on without reading it, which is something I've never done.
Some other faces you'd recognize, we have Timothy Olyphant, who wasn't really famous at this time. He became more well-known in the mid-early 2000s with his show Deadwood. He almost lost the role, though. The producers were nervous that Tim Olyphant was signaling too much in his acting that he was the killer. They thought that he was acting too much like a psycho for each of his scenes early on, which we'll get into that later, but I just want to say that I'm surprised he almost lost the role because of that, because we've talked about how obvious Billy and Stu were in the first movie. Laurie Metcalf was there, Jada Pinkett Smith was in the opening, Rebecca Gayheart plays a sorority sister, a really minor role, and I only just now put this together, but Portia de Rossi is the other sorority sister that you would probably know from Arrested Development, or maybe more so from Marrying Ellen. I just started watching that show this year, so I never would have put it together otherwise. Rebecca Gayheart would also go on to star in another late 90s slasher called Urban Legend, and she's really the best character in that movie. I wish that she had more screen time in Scream 2. When it came to the Stab castings, they were like, this needs to be dripping in about 10 coats of irony. So there's a line in the first Scream where Sydney says,
Hey Sid, just think, if they make a movie about you, who's gonna play you?
I see you as a young Meg Ryan myself.
Thanks, Dewey, with my luck they'd cast Tori Spelling.
and guess who's playing Sidney Prescott in the Stab movie? And Luke Wilson as Billy is great. I think he's so funny. In the movie, Randy also references how David Schwimmer is playing Dewey in the Stab universe. I would love to get a David Schwimmer cameo in Scream 6 or something. And Tori Spelling had auditioned for Sydney in Scream 1, so her casting was kind of a no-brainer. A lot of what makes this franchise so great is all these little inside jokes the filmmakers had that now we get to be a part of. What's not so great about this franchise is that historically people have loved spoiling the movies for other people. The opening scene was leaked, for example. Almost immediately after they filmed the scene, photos from the set ended up on the internet providing spoilers about the movie. This wasn't for lack of trying to keep people in the dark, though. Even the cast didn't know the ending of the film. They used special scripts that were impossible to Xerox. They were all watermarked with the cast's names. Something that I had also never really realized is that Craven made a point to fill the film with paired up characters, like the sorority girls, the bodyguards, Mickey and Derek, etc. A lot of Scream fans already are aware of the rumor that the entire script was leaked online during the shooting of the film. Now, I say that it was just a rumor because Julie Plec said that it was an outline of the script, not the actual script itself. Regardless, she thinks that it might have been a blessing in disguise. Williamson had to rewrite a large portion of the script, giving the pair a chance to regroup and fix parts of the story, mainly in the finale, that they weren't completely happy with initially. Apparently, early versions of the script would have made Derek and Hallie the killers, which I'm glad that they changed that. The leaked script outline also saw Sydney dying of stab wounds at the end of this movie. But Debbie Salt, Mrs. Loomis, was always going to be the mastermind behind everything. Originally, one of our faves was also meant to perish in this installment. Dewey was initially meant to meet his maker in Scream 2, but was given a reprieve because Craven, rightfully so, thought that he might be a fan favorite. His continued survival was due to his real-life relationship with Cox. Craven was a genius, it's true. Also, maybe this isn't a popular opinion, but I feel like their relationship was the backbone of the middle installments of this franchise. In parts 2 through 5, really, I'm like, that's mom and dad right there. So of course, as we cover the rest of the franchise, I'll go over their real-life relationship as it connects to the events of the films. By Scream 2, they were officially an item. That changes later on down the road. Speaking of change, we already discussed how the budget was much bigger this time around, and so the culture of the set was different too. They were able to shoot on location at a university in Georgia called Agnes Scott University. Fun fact, the Omega Beta Zeta house was featured in a bunch of other films like The Midnight Hour, Hocus Pocus, Matilda, and Catch Me If You Can. Shooting the movie was still a blast for everyone involved because this time they were operating under a ton of excitement from their success. Suddenly, to be working on this project where there was so much heat and so much recognition and so much anticipation, there was a real joyful celebratory mood on set, like we'd won the lottery. If you remember from part 1, the cast and crew all loved each other. They were partying all the time. Even if they weren't on the call sheet, they would show up to set because they just wanted to be around each other. It was no different for the sequel. Apparently during the first 4 weeks of shooting while they were on location in Georgia, there was a big party every single weekend. Other traditions were kept up too, like the cast not meeting Roger L. Jackson. And there are a few stories in here that I can hardly believe. Fortunately, when the voice actor met Kennedy in the hotel's room, Kennedy was none the wiser to who he had just met. Like apparently Jamie Kennedy was doing his laundry and Roger L. Jackson had the munchies, so he was like, let me go get a snack. And Jamie Kennedy had no idea who he was. I guess especially back then with no social media, that's a lot more feasible. Or this story where Jackson also once rode to set with Arquette and Cox, but they also weren't aware of the identity of the other passenger in the car. I'm just having a hard time getting a grasp on the fact that no one even knew what he looked like. Like, did they know his name? Did they say hello when they got in the car? I guess I just imagined that they would have had to meet at a wrap party for the first film or at the premiere or something. But maybe Jackson didn't go or they didn't have a wrap party. I'm glad that it's a tradition that was kept up because it seems like it helped the actors, but I do feel kind of bad for Jackson because he was the iconic voice of the franchise, but he doesn't seem to have been involved with like any of the festivities. And the festivities were bountiful. I don't think I even mentioned all the shenanigans that David Arquette would get himself into. He was just a big goober party animal, and so even starting from the first movie, he would set up like beer pong in his hotel room. Also, Zimbecki remembers the actor running around the hotel in his underwear. He's such a dork. Like, he really was Dewey, just a great big man-child. Again, it's just heartening to know that behind the scenes of our favorite franchise, everyone was having a ball. This didn't mean that they were immune to pressure though, but I think that this fell more so on the filmmakers than the actors. Because now not only are they making fun of the horror genre, but sequels in the horror genre. It had to hit the mark, otherwise there would have been way too much room for criticism. If the film failed on any level, the filmmakers would have served up on a silver platter the opening punchline and lead for every film critic in the country. Also at the time, sequels would generally make about 2/3 of what their predecessors made at the box office. Luckily, this was not the case for Scream because Scream 2 went on to make $172 million internationally. And everyone knew that they were gonna kill it too. Like, you won't believe this. They moved the release date of the new James Bond movie and Titanic so that they wouldn't have to compete with Scream. Titanic, James Cameron's $2 billion earning movie, moved its release date so that they wouldn't have to compete with the behemoth that was Scream. Like, the power that we, the Scream audience, has should never be underestimated. Like, they're scared of us. And to pump out this successful sequel just 357 days after the release of the original film is not technically unheard of. Friday the 13th did do the same thing, but those movies are not at all on the same technical level as Scream in my opinion. Now Scream 6 will be doing kind of the same thing, with the 6th installment being released just 14 months after the 5th. I'm sure that monetarily it's gonna kill it, but we'll have to wait and see how the quality holds up. And that will do it for story time today, so we will pick up on the behind the scenes story with Scream for Dummies Part 3. But I still have a fair amount of quotes to pull from this book as they pertain to fun stories as we go through the plot. Speaking of, should we get into the plot breakdown? I think we should. Now, some people out there think that this opening is better than the original. I know, yeah, it's weird, but like, don't make them feel bad about it. Part of me does get it though, because this is another exceptional opening to a horror film. First of all, the setting. I'm sure when we watch this movie, we all wish that we could watch the Scream movies in a theater that was this lively, and we'll get to that opening kill, don't worry. But something very important to this installment of the franchise is the black perspective that they bring in.
Now, I'm gonna tell you what it is, okay? It's a dumb-ass white movie about some dumb-ass white girls getting their white asses cut the fuck up.
This had never really had attention called to it before in the mainstream. It's a well-documented and long-running joke in the horror community that we wouldn't have like half the horror movies that we do if white people weren't the leads of them. I think that this scene from Nope kind of epitomizes the different attitudes between black and white people when they're presented with horrifying situations. Nope, they do not get involved, they hear a noise, they do not go investigate, they basically just operate under a much stricter set of common sense rules. So that dialogue was more than earned, and that commentary continues throughout the movie. There's also the iconic dialogue about her frustration at the Stab movie.
Why she gotta be naked? What does that have to do with the plot of the story, her being butt-ass naked? Bitch, hang the phone up and star 69 his ass. Damn!
All iconic lines, but one of my favorite ones never gets brought up. Again, I'm gonna be throwing so many underrated moments your way, just buckle up.
Besides, scary movies are great foreplay.
Excuse me?
The best foreplay, actually. Watching a horror movie with someone that you're trying to court is such good foreplay. Like, let me explain. What other genre makes you want to grip onto someone for dear life? Like, are you really watching a car chase scene in Mission Impossible and going, oh my god, hold my hand? What other genre makes your heart rate elevate as high as horror does?
Adrenaline Marine. It's good to be scared. It's primal, you know what I'm saying?
When you're with a hot person, your heart rate also elevates too, so that kind of goes hand in hand. And then it gets you both more excited, like, come on. I may be known as Haunted Hippie, but you can also call me the Love Witch. Anyway, so the carnage begins with Joel getting stabbed in the face through the stall wall. My only question is just like, how did Ghostface know where to stab? Because I feel like that would take some serious calculation. Also, when the killer starts talking to himself, it's very much giving Pamela Voorhees' Kill Her Mommy.
Kill her, Mommy. Kill her.
There are multiple Friday the 13th references in this movie though, and we'll get to them. Obviously, that's the first stomach drop moment in this movie. It was a lot more subtle in the original Scream, but I make a case that the first time that my heart truly sank is when the killer sat down next to Jada in the theater. Dramatic irony is a thing that such few horror directors really have a grip on, and Wes Craven did. Being helpless as the audience with this crucial information that we want to share with the character is like the best kind of frustration. Her death scene is really brutal by design, and I feel like this is the only sequel that really brings the horror to public spaces. Maybe a little bit in Scream 4, but we'll get there. It's a situation that horror fans love to be in at the theater, but you could easily be killed that way. Like, imagine that you're at a horror con and someone brutally murders someone else and everyone just thinks that it's a performance piece. Maureen's dramatic death was partly Pinkett Smith's idea. In an interview, she said, "I want to die the most horrific death that has ever happened in a horror film, and I want it to be long and excruciating," and he was like, cool, talking about Craven. I love that it was Jada's idea and that it turned out that way, because I don't think that it would have been quite as impactful otherwise. They use the same tactic as the first film, where there is help that is so immediately available and yet she's helpless to receive it. I also love how the crowd goes from being so excited to see the carnage on screen and then the total tonal shift when it happens in real life. In conclusion, it's another brilliant opening, but doesn't quite match the original in my opinion. And that's really just on the rewatch value, because something about Drew's death always has me wishing for a different outcome. I think there's just way much more of a build-up, and you are starting to get kind of a sense of Casey Becker's character, so you kind of start to get attached. Whereas with the sequel, it's a lot more of like a 1-2 punch kind of situation. Anyway, let's pick up with our favorite final girl. We open with Sydney getting another call, but this time she has caller ID, so it completely kills the prank this kid is pulling. And yet again, Sydney is in such a comfy, cute outfit, like they really knew how to dress her. That does not continue in Scream 3 though. They dress her up like a mom, and not a cool mom.
Not like a regular mom, I'm a cool mom.
Am I gonna reference Mean Girls in every single Scream video? I don't know, maybe I will, maybe I won't. We also saw Cotton Weary being interviewed on the TV, which sets up some events later on. We also meet Hallie in this scene, and I just struggle with this character. She's so just the black best friend trope. She's never fleshed out with her own wants and desires. I thought it was such a perfect opportunity to call attention to that trope, but they just fall right into it. It's just weird because there are other black characters in this movie that are calling out those tropes and stereotypes, but they don't take advantage of it with her character.
You're a professional cameraman. You've got to act like one.
Yeah, but I want to report the news. I don't want to be the news. Besides,
Brothers don't last long in situations like this.
They do nothing like that with Hallie, and I've always wanted to like her character, but she's a pretty nothing personality. To be fair, how on earth does one live up to Tatum Riley? I don't know. Then we get one of the best commentary scenes, film class. We have hot girl Sarah Michelle Gellar defending horror movies. We love that.
Movies are not responsible for our actions.
They did such a good job with her because she's only in 2 scenes of the movie, but the impact. I feel like I've said this before, but my film theory classes were not that cool. I loved my film theory classes, but nobody had recall and film knowledge like the students in this movie. I kind of felt like I was surrounded by a room full of fakes, but we did spend most of the time reading these like peer-reviewed essays from critics on the films that we were breaking down and writing essays about them. So honestly, what I wouldn't give for a class that played out like the one in Scream 2. Now in retrospect, I must again stress how obvious they made the killer in Scream 2.
The killer obviously patterned himself after 2 serial killers who have been immortalized on film.
Thank you.
Then he goes on to keep defending sequels, like come on. And throughout the movie, he's with his little video camera and he's always just going on about like, oh my god, did you hear that she was stabbed 7 times? Also, you can kind of see how this movie is just teeing up critics to be like, this movie is so stupid.
Stab 2? Who'd want to do that? Sequels suck. By definition alone, they're inferior films. The entire horror genre was destroyed by sequels.
If this sequel had destroyed this franchise, then it would have become very meta in a bad way, not in a fun way. Also, remember how in my last video, I was like, ugh, Randy does not understand how out of his league Sydney is, but I think he figured it out in the sequel. Narrator voice. He did not figure it out in the sequel.
How would you make it different?
I'd let the geek get the girl.
Okay, so Randy hasn't learned. In my last video, I said that too many men believed their mothers when they told them they were the most handsome boy in the world. I got some comments that were like, don't listen, your mom was right. I'm so sorry, but if your mom was the only person that ever told you that, the call is literally coming from inside the house. Like, I don't know what to tell you. These kinds of pining men are so annoying to me. Like, her boyfriend is kissing her and Randy's like, ugh, get a room.
Get a room.
Why don't you get a job? The reason why this pisses me off so much is because Derek is kissing her because he's literally trying to make her feel better about the fact that people have started dying around them and she's had a really bad day. She skipped class because she like doesn't want to be stared at and stuff, and so he kisses her to like make her feel better and she's like, oh, that was nice. And Randy's like, ugh, get a room. It's like, okay, if you actually were in love with this woman, like if you really cared about Sydney, maybe you'd care about her emotions and her happiness, but instead you're like, I should be the one kissing her, blah. Whatever, doesn't matter because now Gail is back, but she's not just back, now she's Gail with red highlights. We're also introduced to Debbie Salt, aka Mrs. Loomis, and in retrospect, she's still not the most obvious, but this line of dialogue was kind of a clue.
I took your seminar in Chicago last year. I was the one in the front row asking all the questions.
Of course Mrs. Loomis would be stalking Gail and asking her a bunch of questions and trying to get down to the bottom of the events. Then we have some celebrity cameos. I was suspicious of these girls at first. I don't know if this is an internalized misogyny thing or if sororities just genuinely attract like these hives of the worst and meanest girls you've ever met. I've never really gotten on with them. I've always hated organized woo-woo shenanigans. Like I was in NCL in high school and even senior year I was the class president and I hated that shit. I liken that to sororities, at least I assume that they're kind of similar, because they're like these fake rich girl clubs that put on the front of being really charitable, but you never really do anything for the community. But it was an extracurricular that helped me get into college, so hey. I think that they were definitely using that to their advantage because also sorority girls are usually the main characters. Now they're the suspects and I live for it. But moving on, what? Oh, wait, do you hear something?
Who's that?
Do it?
It's the man, the lone sheriff, just a good old boy. He's back to keep an eye on Sid, and he's also kind of operating as a vigilante, trying to catch the bad guy.
If there is some freaked out psycho trying to follow in Billy Loomis's footsteps, you probably already know. Or her. Or them.
Him, her, or them. Dewey said non-binary rights. I know he probably meant the plural, but whatever. I'm gonna go with my thing. Now we have some truly iconic and underrated Dewey lines coming up. First, of course, we have the slap of the sequel with Sydney and Gail. Can't leave that out. Because Gail has had no growth at this point. She's just there for the money.
You need to check your conscience at the door, sweetie. I'm not here to be loved.
At first, I always just loved Gail despite this because she didn't move through the world the way that most women do. She is the opposite of a people pleaser. She lets no one walk all over her, and so it's kind of a confidence booster, but it has its drawbacks too.
Page 41. Deputy Dewey oozed
with inexperience.
The way that she's written about him, like, I would be pissed off too. It's understandable. And he's like, I think that you have a cold storage shed where your heart should be. He's reading her to filth the way he should. Ugh, I also keep getting copyright issues with this scene, but it's one of my favorite Dewey lines of all time. It's the one where he's like, how do you know that I'm not just acting like a goober on purpose? Basically, he's like, I can maneuver myself in any given situation. I love this character development for him. In the movie, he is oozing inexperience. He even lets Tatum walk all over him all the time. I also think that might be the answer to the ice cream question that I posed in my last video. Literally, why is Dewey eating ice cream? They wanted to make him so boyish and dumb for what? It was all on purpose. He uses his boyish wiles to manipulate people. Now here is Dewey's best line ever, potentially? I don't know.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some oozing to do. One more thing. Nice streaks.
Excuse me, I have some oozing to do. I am gonna use that to get out of everything now. Pre-production meeting for a movie I hate? I'm sorry, I have some oozing to do. Kylie, hi, this is the Los Angeles County Court Office. You need to report for jury duty. Oof, sorry, I'm gonna be oozing that day. Moving on to the party scene.
Hi! No, I really mean that. Hi.
Underrated, no comment. Matthew Lillard, who played Stu Mocker, visited the set while the sorority party scene was being filmed, and he can be glimpsed in the background behind Murphy. You might not have recognized him because his hair was bleached at that time, but there he is. Now, here is another great suspenseful scene with the death of poor Cece. We get another Friday the 13th reference on the phone.
Hello? Stop it!
Also, I don't think that I have anything to offer about this scene that hasn't been said, but it was devastating because I love my Daphne. I will say though that I love that they still include the classic knife wipe scene from the original, but this one isn't as satisfying. Like, look at Stu wiping that blade. I don't know that anyone in the sequels ever really nailed that down as well as Stu did, but I'm still not done with my rewatch of the franchise. So then everyone is clearing out of the party and Sydney gets another phone call, and I'm so sorry, but I cackle during this scene because she's getting chased around and Ghostface fully tumbles over the chair. Was that on purpose? I don't know. Obviously the stunt was on purpose, that's not what I mean, but I think that might be one of the single moments of this franchise that was just so hilarious while not even trying to be. It's just such a nasty spill, and I have a really bad habit of laughing a lot whenever people fall down, so I'll let you be the judge. Then we begin to see the threads of Gail's character development, which I love.
What about this ex-cop Dewey Riley? It's kind of strange that he showed up.
Yeah, what's he doing here? Dewey's a good guy, unlike some of us.
She's finally starting to have like a shred of self-awareness about how her reporting impacts other people. Her progress definitely isn't linear throughout the franchise, but that's also true to life. Next is another iconic scene with Derek singing to Sydney in the cafeteria, and yet again, Mickey is being so obvious.
I've been thinking about this whole murder thing. Have you checked out Randy? I know he's an innocent victim first time around, but he's a little off, you know what I'm saying?
I didn't even include some of his other lines that were really reminiscent of Stu's, or all the times when he's recording all his friends with his little video camera. He has barely any screen time, but he spends it all being sus. Of course, this is the more iconic moment though, but it makes me want to gag whenever he puts his Greek letters around her neck. That's not a romantic gesture. That is so embarrassing. I would never want anyone to know that I was monogamously seeing a frat bro. I don't care if he's gonna be a doctor. I really don't. It could have been Wes making fun of at that time. Every rom-com had that scene where someone sang to a vintage song. Patrick Lussier was also very annoyed by this because after editing it a bunch of times, the song got really stuck in his head. It also reminds me of this other subversion on the trope from Freaky Friday, which is probably the funniest scene in the movie.
And I must confess, I still believe. Hit me, baby.
Gets me every time. So then we observe the rules of sequels with Randy, and what's always bothered me about this scene is that he never finishes his last thought.
If you want your sequel to become a franchise, never, ever...
How do we find the killer, Randy? That's what I want to know.
If you want to become a franchise, never ever what? Again, he calls the killer being Mickey, but then his reasoning would also implicate himself. Even so, Randy called it again. Why don't we listen to him? And of course, I think there's underrated dialogue in this scene that doesn't get paid its due.
Please, this is me talking, Randy, the unrequited love slave of Sidney Prescott.
That's what I'm gonna start calling my subs, my unrequited love slaves. The next thing that I want to talk about is just an example of how Sidney Prescott is such a good role model for young women. Sydney's telling Derek that she needs some distance, and he's not really understanding, but she gets the job done anyway. She does such a good job setting that boundary for herself, even when he kind of asks sort of a manipulative question like, oh, is this really about you trying to protect me, or do you just not trust me? And she's like, sorry, Derek, I don't know what to tell you. Get away from me. In the next scene, of course, the most iconic dialogue is this.
When she starts smoking.
Ever since those nude pictures on the internet.
was just my head. It was Jennifer Aniston's body.
But I need to sing some unsung praises for some dialogue that is uttered not even a minute later.
Okay, so what do you want to do, bonehead? You just want to sit here and wait and see who drops next?
Well, I don't know. Bonehead.
Whatever happened to goofy name calling? In the original, Tatum is calling Dewey Doofus, and this one they're calling each other Bonehead. It's a lost art. But of course, this is also the scene where we lose Randy, but real quick before we get there, again, I just want to point out how they make public spaces frightening. This is the opposite of a location that you would generally feel terrified in, which is why it's so brilliant and tragic. And that's probably the biggest strength of this sequel, in my opinion, is just having the ability to make these public spaces so scary. And the fact that it's in broad daylight too. Two underrated moments from this scene, the first of which being when Dewey tackles this random guy just full out and he goes, "Can I help you? Can I help you?" Imagine you get tackled and the first thing you think to say is, "Can I help you?" And then the moment that confirms the filmmakers were in on the gay subtext of the first movie.
And Billy Loomis, what the fuck? What a rat-looking, homo-repressed mama's boy.
A rat-looking, homo-repressed mama's boy. Confirmed. Even Randy picked up on the homoerotic subtext. Also, maybe he picked up on that clue when Stu was stroking his ear and asking about his motive. Then Randy dies and it's very sad. Alright, can I hear some noise from the Randy fan club? Yes, may he rest in peace. Now we have some juicy tea to get into regarding this scene. The star wasn't given a heads up about his character's demise prior to reading the script for the first time. I remember reading it in the table read and I was like, oh fuck. His parents were also there the day that they were filming that scene, and I imagine that was kind of traumatic for them. After Craven had gotten the shots he wanted for the scene, Kennedy told him he wanted to take things further. Kennedy says that what is in the film is the version he created with Craven. Over the years, they have heard from fans about their disdain that the beloved character was killed off in the film. I think it was, in a way, taking the audience's voice away. Yeah, when I first saw this movie, I was devastated by his death. I didn't see it coming at all. I think it's less upsetting now because I've just come to terms with it, the fact that he's gone, and also I'm a little bit annoyed by his pining. And with that, I feel like they were kind of trying to throw us off with that and being like, oh yeah, maybe this time he'll get the girl. Nope, that entitlement was indeed a little bit misplaced on his part. Now I just briefly want to touch on this library scene where the killer targets Sydney on the computer. That scene was always rumored to have a cameo from Rose McGowan in it, but the actress confirms that she is not in the scene, saying that she had already begun to be blacklisted by Harvey Weinstein by that point. Now I wish that the author would go into why she got blacklisted. Maybe he does later in the book. I still haven't finished it yet. I'm going in parts based on which movie I'm covering. But she was one of the very first women to ever come out against Harvey Weinstein, and this was at the Sundance Film Festival in 1997. And how fucked is it that back then they were more likely to blacklist the victims than to, I don't know, imprison the rapists? So I just wanted to dedicate at least this moment to Rose McGowan because her courage probably gave other women the courage to step forward as well. And now he's behind bars, unable to harm other women. And also, as you recall, his sentence was just lengthened. So anyways, moving on. Then Joel leaves, and thank God for that, he deserves to live. Then Dewey and Gail are looking through her tapes, and Dewey's score is playing. It's a vibe. I'm cheering when they start to make out. When they kiss, I'm like, yes, as opposed to their first kiss, where I'm like, Dewey, she is manipulating you. So let's hear some noise for Gail and Dewey's love. Yes. This was also an amazing misdirect that takes us into the best chase scene of the movie. The theater sound booth chase scene is harrowing. It's such a good scene because you have no idea how deep this room goes, like when her luck is gonna run out, when she'll stop being able to run away. And then, when Dewey gets stabbed, the scene is so awful with the soundproof glass, but what a good technique. I love that scene. It's probably in my top 5 horror scenes from the franchise. My favorite scenes in general are usually just the ones where all the hot people are just hanging out. But this scene is so tragic. I love Gail, and seeing her reacting to his death just always makes me emotional. Things don't slow down as we enter Act 3 either, because then we have the equally harrowing car death scenes for these poor detectives. And the best death of this movie is probably awarded to the guy with the pole through his pulsing, oozing head. Can't come to the precinct right now, boss. I have some oozing to do. But the other guy who got his throat slit, the actor Philip Pavel, had a really hard time shooting this scene. So they had to do this practical effect where there was a sponge underneath his prosthetic and he would squeeze it and the blood would come out. But the tube fell into my jacket and they pumped 3 gallons of Caro syrup into my underwear. For continuity, I had to sit in that red Caro syrup all night, but I was happy to do it. Something worth noting is that people with penises have that privilege. I'd be like, I am so sorry, but I am not about to get a raging yeast infection for this production. One thing that I respect about this franchise is that they keep up the gore for pretty much every installment, but in those first 2 movies, I mean, wow. Also in this scene is the one time where Hallie gets to shine and she says,
I want to know who it is.
Oh no.
Oh, come on, Sid, come on, please, let's just go. Look, stupid people go back, okay? Smart people run. We're smart people, so we should just get the fuck out of here.
I agree. I think that in this instance, Sydney is being dumb, not brave, but then they use this to subvert our expectations yet again. They subvert it by killing Hallie. She shouldn't have died either, but you have to kill your darlings. At this point, we should just assume that they're gonna do the opposite of whatever it is they're setting up. Although with Billy and Mickey as such obvious red herrings and then them being the killers, oh, I don't know. Rip Hallie, I know that your fan club was disappointed, but this leads us right into the climax, which is almost 20 minutes long. So Mickey is revealed to be one of the killers, and he tries to gaslight Sydney into believing that Derek is his partner, but then Derek has a brutal death that's emphasized by him being like, "I'd never hurt you." So brutal. That's something that I know that Sydney has carried with her the rest of her life, knowing that she didn't untie an innocent man. I think most people would point to this line as being one of the most iconic, talking about believing the movies, etc. Because at this time, the public perception was that there was violence in media that was affecting children. So that is kind of in a way one of the most meta lines of the movie. But this is one of my favorite, and I think one of the more underrated lines.
You're a psychotic.
Yeah, well, shh. That'll be our little secret.
I'm not gonna act like that's my favorite line though. Sometimes those iconic lines are so well deserved in their places on those top 10 lists, and this next one is no different.
Well, you're forgetting one thing about Billy Loomis.
What's that?
I fucking killed him.
You fucking tell him, Sydney. I also love this redirect where for about 5 seconds you think that Gail is in cahoots, but then Mrs. Loomis steps out behind her. I'll be honest, I was so into this whole scene the first time around, but there is so much conversation. They talk so much, and realistically it's like, what's the point? Why are you even leaving this room for error? Just kill them if you really want to. It's this goofy movie thing where of course they have to explain their motive and everything to the final girl, but like, shut up. Sydney does eventually say that, but not until the next movie. I do love when the action starts picking back up because Sydney's so smart, like using all the stage design to mess with Mrs. Loomis. And my favorite thing yet again, she gets another punch in. I think I've decided to take it upon myself to point out literally every single time that someone gets punched in these movies. I love watching people get slapped around in movies. It's crazy. Then Cotton shows up and it's like, oh my god, more talking, okay. Like, this guy sucks. I know he's playing the part right now to get Sydney to safety, but what is his obsession with Diane Sawyer? After Mrs. Loomis is taken care of though, Gail's hand pops up, which is a subversion of how you think the killer is gonna pop back up alive. I also forget pretty much every single time that this is about to happen. I don't know why, it's a pretty iconic and scary, jarring moment, but it's just never stuck in my brain. I suppose now it will be, because I'm gonna have to watch that over and over to edit this video. Now you might think that I don't really have much more to say about this movie after this point, but you'd be mistaken. This is another one of the most impactful moments of Gail's character arc in my opinion. Gail is about to give her story, but then she leaves the camera in favor of seeing that Dewey is okay. That shows incredible growth, because in the first movie, she was beat to hell and was immediately reporting. The top review on Letterboxd is even referencing that for the first movie. Can you tell I fucking love Gail and Dewey? Up to this point, Gail had literally never cared about anything else except getting her story. In that moment when she had another hit, she was fresh from the battle. She chose instead to go with Dewey to the hospital, effectively losing some of the shock value her audience would have had if she had just reported in that state. Cotton gets a nice turnaround too as the hero. Sydney's like, he's who you want to talk to, which I guess is fine. I don't know, I don't like him. He's so entitled. I get that Sydney kind of sent him to jail for like a year, but I still don't feel like she owes him anything. Her mom was murdered, then all her friends were murdered, and her boyfriend tried to kill her, and then all her friends were murdered again, including her boyfriend. Like, leave her alone.
Never alone.
But he does have a nice last line to close us out.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. It'll make a hell of a movie.
Okay, now I'm done. In conclusion, I don't feel like the sequel was quite as iconic as the original, where I was pausing like every 2 seconds to be like, this line of dialogue, that character, this outfit. This movie was really lacking in iconic characters in my opinion, and I don't feel like the dialogue was quite as good, but I guess by definition sequels are inferior films, right? I am so excited for my next video to talk about Scream 3 because I feel like there are so many more underrated moments from that movie. That movie does not see the love that it deserves. So you better subscribe and click that notification bell so that you don't miss it. If you'd like even more content from me, you can join the Patreon, so a big thank you to all these names on screen. We have a great little community over there, and I post like typically 4 to 6 bonus videos every single month, and it's only $5 a month for bonus content, so you're really getting the bang for your buck. So I do reviews of movies over there that I feel like haven't really earned a full-length solo review on my main channel. So this month that includes Knock at the Cabin, Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, The Outwaters, and pretty soon Cocaine Bear. If that's not for you, the rest of my social media is linked down below, so go nuts, have fun over there. Less than 2 weeks out from the release of Scream 6, I hope you're as excited as I am. More than anything, I hope that you enjoyed this video though, and that I see you in Scream for Dummies Part 3. Bye!